the mental health, the problems in it. Some things can just come on and you don't know why. Like I'd be in a shopping centre or I'd be at home and all of a sudden I'll just start crying. As a male, it is a big thing. Alcohol has this stigma about alcoholism and that, so we pretend that I haven't got a problem. It's okay. I can handle this. I can go through this thing, and you do have this, and then all of a sudden you have this breakdown, and you go, what the hell's going on here? And you have these thoughts going through your head all the time, and you're really struggling.
In a world drowning in wellness noise, fitness fads, and curated perfection, we're here to talk about the reality. This is a space for the experts who have the data and the humans who have the scars. We're stripping away the bullshit to look at the areas of health that don't get enough attention and the evolution of how we'll live tomorrow. I'm Krystal Perkins, and this is Unfiltered, the truth about being human. Today's episode of Unfiltered is the biology battle, brain science and mental health, with Professor Greg Sutherland and Warren Mundine. Today we're bridging the gap between the personal and the national. We're exploring brain science and mental health. Before we get into the guest introductions, some interesting statistics on brain science and mental health. In Australia, a national study of mental health and wellbeing taken between 2020 and 2022 identified 1 in 5 people aged between 16 to 85, or 4.3 million, experience a mental disorder in the previous 12 months. The Global World Health Organization, World Mental Health Today and Mental Health Atlas 2024 identified more than 1 billion people live with a mental health condition. A recent Ipsos survey indicates that mental health is now the world's top health concern, and it's taken over cancer as the world's most cited health concern, rising from 27% in 2018 to 45% in 2024 by respondents in 31 countries. Today we're joined by Professor Greg Sutherland, a cartographer of the mind. As Director of the New South Wales Brain Tissue Resource Centre, Greg uses high-tech brainomics to map the human brain. In simple terms, he studies what goes wrong inside the human brain at a microscopic and molecular level when people develop serious conditions like alcohol-related brain damage, Alzheimer's disease, dementia, and certain psychiatric illnesses. He runs the New South Wales Brain Resource Centre, or a brain bank. This is a special facility that collects and stores donated human brains after people pass away, a legacy that people leave behind, with full consent and ethical approvals. He also leads Brainomics, a research group, and his team approaches mapping the brain in great detail. Joining him is Warren Mundine, a man who's navigated the highest levels of Australian policy to argue that you can't fix the mind without fixing the environment. Warren has faced his own battles with mental health and is here to offer a human element to the conversation. We are seeing mental health crises and humanitarian crises in our own backyard, with Indigenous self-harm and hospitalisation rates rising by 56% over the last decade. Warren has also written a number of books and released a book titled In Black and White, which focuses on race, politics, and the struggles of overcoming segregation, discrimination, personal hardship, and political betrayal. Today we are weaving their worlds together. Greg's physical evidence of how the brain breaks and Warren's personal journey. We're looking for the point where biology meets human experience. I'm Krystal Perkins, and this is Unfiltered. Greg, welcome today.
Well, thank
Your
you.
brainomics research shows that alcohol-related damage isn't a lack of willpower. It's a physical metabolic collapse of white matter. Firstly, what is white matter? And also, how does seeing the physical evidence help you talk to people about things such as addiction as a biological injury rather than a moral failing?
I'll start with your first question, which is associated with, well, what is white matter? Well, basically the brain can be divided up into grey matter, where the all-important neurons, or at least the cell bodies of neurons, live. And then the white matter is made up largely of a substance called myelin, which insulates the connections between the various neurons in different areas of the brain. So white matter is like highways between different areas of the brain and down into the spinal cord. And the grey matter is, I suppose, cities between those highways. Mm-hmm. I think in terms of understanding people and what you see physically, there's no doubt that there is. Well, the first thing I would say is that it's quite easy to recognise behaviours and diseases. Or sometimes it's easy to recognise those diseases of the brain. It's also relatively easy for us to assemble molecular markers along the lines of what you were speaking about, whether it was proteomics or genomics. But in between those two is that there's quite a large knowledge gap, maybe more better referred to as a knowledge abyss. Mm-hmm. And so what we try to do with our research is we collect that molecular data from mm-hmm. a bottom-up approach. We try to get closer to understanding why that deranged or slightly abnormal, in many cases, molecular data actually leads to these phenotypes that we see when someone has a brain disease. I think we always try to keep the person who may have donated their brain, or the person who's suffering from that disease, in the front of our mind. But I think it's also true that when you are down in the minutiae, you're probably concentrating very much on what's in front of you. So I think there's a little bit of both in terms of trying to relate molecular stuff to. We use the term phenotype, but essentially people's behaviour who may have these diseases.
And how do you see how does seeing that physical evidence help you talk to people about addiction or those diseases?
Yeah, well, the major thing is that, particularly addiction of alcohol, because alcohol is the most widely used substance of potential abuse. It's really regarded as normal in society. So it can be seen as a weakness if you have succumbed to alcohol addiction. It's often secretive because it's stigmatized. But there's no doubt, as you were just mentioning, that we do see damage in people's brains. So it essentially, alcohol addiction, or what we call alcohol use disorder, could be regarded as similar to any other disease, whether it's Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's or some of the psychiatric diseases like schizophrenia. And you can tell people, look, you actually have a disease, and a disease that hopefully with the work that we're doing is going to have treatments or better treatments in the near future.
Can we tell now from the research that how it might be, that one person can be addicted to alcohol and be affected by it, but another person may not be as addicted or affected by alcohol?
Yeah,
or is that too simple?
Well, we can get a little bit hand wavy, and I suppose when you face with this, because addiction would be what we call these polygenic diseases. So, a contrast would be something like Huntington's disease, where a mutation that's carried by one of your parents comes down to the children, and they develop Huntington's disease. Whereas alcohol use disorder, similar to Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, or at least most of the types of those diseases, is polygenic. So there's tiny little bits of different genes that together, and in the absence of protective genes, lead to these diseases. That's the genetic side. There's also a lifestyle. And then, people will argue between the genetics and the lifestyle, also referred to as environment. I mean, in reality, it's a combination of the both. So we talk about interaction. So someone may have the genetic machinery, but if they're not exposed to alcohol, then they're not going to develop the condition. From there, it probably gets quite difficult, because the problem we have with alcohol use disorder is there's often a reason why people start drinking in the first place, and that is a sort of an entanglement which is very difficult to kind of sort out or distinguish from the actual alcohol use disorder itself.
So thinking about all those factors of genetics as well as environment, but then there's the behaviours and the psychology that go with why of decisions around alcohol, and that may not be so evident when you're testing a brain as such. Yeah.
And the reason why someone may have, alcohol, for example, as opposed to other substances of abuse, is very readily kind of available, and it may be the first, cab off the rank or bottle off the shelf, because of that immediacy about it. But there is, for every human, and what makes studying human tissue as I do so interesting as opposed to the models we try to set up to look at diseases, that everyone comes to their death with an absolute unique set of experiences through their life.
Yeah.
And we know that the brain responds to experiences. Norman Dirge had a book where he, I think, did a good job of describing how the brain can change, and it changes to its environment. And the point I was making is that unfortunately, some people can suffer quite unfortunate mental trauma in their lives, and other people who may have exactly the same genetics may never have those kind of priming events that maybe lead them towards alcohol. I think from there's probably even more genetics which dictate that there are some people whose brain responds to alcohol may be slightly different to others, and may be accelerated down the path of addiction. But we're really still at a pretty formative stage of trying to understand those processes.
It's incredible that the brain is engineered for experiences, but also adapting to them.
Yes.
I've not heard that. And it's amazing that it does that, in the sense of taking in all those factors. You might be born with certain genetics, but your environment will also engineer your experiences as well as your chemistry, I suppose.
Yeah, no, it does. And I think psychologists would say, look, you've got a bad habit. You've got this critique or self-critique happening in your mind, and they'll say to you, but you've developed it because it's been useful to you at some stage, or some sort of survival. What they're seeing again at that that behavioural level is somehow underwritten in a physical and a molecular level, sometimes in the brain. But again, what that looks like compared with that behaviour all the way down to millions and millions of molecules, and actually being able to decipher that, to be able to say, oh, it's that molecule, or it's that group of molecules that's gone wrong. We can reverse that. That's still what we're trying to do, but it's still a very difficult task. But there's no doubt that the brain is really reinforcing what it thinks is useful to it. And as we might get into soon, there's experiences now in modern life which we are probably misinterpreting from what we would normally say regarded as imminent threat.
That's just incredible, and that's why your research is so important. And speaking of experiences, Warren, you've spent 40 years in the public eye, where strength is a strong currency. Looking back at your own mental health journey, where was the biggest disconnect, do you think, between the strong leader the public saw and your day-to-day reality? And why is there still a stigma, do you think, about people getting help for mental health?
Yeah, just probably dealing with the stigma part is as a society, and it's just as a Australian society, but it's also, you go down to different levels, as an Aboriginal society or a migrant society or something. I don't think we handle mental health at all. In fact, it's seen as some sort of shame factor. So one of the things you have, like, here I was this bloke out the front doing this business stuff and doing this political stuff and taking up the fight, the cudgel and stuff like that. But at the same time, in my head, there was this stigma about I'm not coping, but I got to cope. And so you bring this facade, this mask with you, and you wear it, and then until you get in that little private world of yourself, that's when you get the mental health, the problems in it. Like, and some things just come on, and you don't know why. Like, I'd be in a shopping centre or I'd be at home, and all of a sudden I'll just start crying. Now, for a family like my family, which is a very about strength, about being able to be survivors, fighting through things and stuff like that, and we have a reputation for that as a family. And then myself as well, people sort of sit there and go, well, how does this bloke, he's in politics, he's in business, and he gets beaten up, and then he comes back and he survives through these processes. And yet we and so for me, that was my biggest disconnect from me, this person who was this person at the same time. And I struggled with that really, really badly. Yeah.
And I think we've also talked about being stoic and how people around us or generations were taught to be stoic, whether they were coming home from war, like in your family's case, or in a gendered sense of men being strong and showing courage at all times. How do you think that sort of culture may have affected what you were going through in terms of trying to be strong or hide, perhaps?
As a male, it is a big thing. And like Greg was talking about in regard to alcohol, has this stigma about alcoholism and that, so we pretend that I haven't got a problem. It's okay. I can handle this. I can go through this thing. And you do have this, and then all of a sudden you have this breakdown, and you go, what the hell's going on here? And you have these thoughts going through your head all the time, and you're really struggling. And I don't know who it was. I think Churchill was, but it's probably other people as well who come up with that tag, the black dog and the black cloud that's hanging over you. And I used to think, gee, that's interesting. But when you go into this, it is really like that. You've got this incredible black cloud over you. But at the same time, you've got to get up every morning and you've got to perform. That people in your work are depending on you. You're depending on yourself. You got family. You got to pay a mortgage. You got to do all that type of stuff, and sometimes your mates and that don't help you in this process, because they go, well, come on, mate, wake up to yourself, get on with it and stuff like that. It's okay. But I was very fortunate that I did have two males who picked up and stuff, and that helped me in my in my journey, which I'm still going through.
As in family or friends?
They were just friends, actually. And they, and it's really funny, my father wasn't that much help for me because he was like, they were Second World War people, and he was very much about just chin up and move on type thing.
Sweep it under the carpet.
Yeah, sweep it under the carpet. Don't worry about it. But one of my friends, he was a lawyer working with us, and he said to me, there's nothing wrong with I can see there's problems with. There's nothing wrong with admitting that and going and seeing a psychologist and a psychiatrist and stuff. And he recommended that. I resisted that a lot, because I had this crazy thing, which was, you have to be mad to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist, which is
literally
have to, and you have this
do.
image of that, and I'm not mad, even though I'm slowly imploding, and it got to the stage there where I would wake up in the morning and I'd be disappointed because I'm still alive, and so you get that, and then you start getting into this really. I'm going to say the word crazy, but it a really strange world where you just want this stop, and the only way you can see that stopping is you die, you go off to sleep and die, and it's that was like I've heard about these things, I've read about these things and stuff like that, and as a child we had things which we call senile, grandparents, great grandparents, we used to call them senile and stuff like that. You see these things, but it's something that you will never affect you because you're a man. You have these, you're the warrior, you got to just get up and fight through things.
And it's all about language and how things are positioned and what you're saying, and I guess other people's perceptions also weighing on how you're feeling and what you're thinking, marketing. Were there any other times or experiences in life that helped guide you on the journey?
Well, good and bad, actually. A lot of it was bad. Like I talked about this, this what is a man process. Look, that's changing a bit, but I think we've got a long journey to go in regard to that. That you're out there, you're the warrior. You're the person who's got to look after the family, the protector, the protector, and provider. It's almost like we haven't advanced that too far, too far from the cave, really. And you got to bring the wood in and start the fire and go out and wrestle a woolly mammoth or something like that. And at the same time, the littlest things used to trigger me all the time, something would happen, or something simple thing would happen, which and then all of a sudden I just break down and really suffer, and I was in constant. My body was just in this constant pain and agony for, I used to go for runs and do things to try and stop that pain and things from happening. But it did get worse. I remember once I got off the plane back into Sydney, flying. I think I come out of Canberra, and I just had this moment, and I just went to work, and I actually planned how I was going to go to the top of the building and just throw myself off, and how you do that. So it is and I'm still going. Still on that journey, but it's, and then at the same time you got this pretense. People think, oh, look at Warren, he's this happy-go-lucky type bloke. He seems to overcome issues, and that when he fails, he still gets up off the ground, he gets punched in the nose or something like that, he still battles on. And you consciously do that. You put yourself like, there's nothing wrong with me, and this is how you talk to yourself as well.
Almost a survival mode.
It is,
even though you want the reverse.
That's right. Yeah, it's really, you're fighting with yourself all the time.
Yeah. And Greg, your research in terms of brain-body connection, what Warren's talking about, is something that you do at the Krystal Perkins Centre. So considering that research and how systemic conditions like, say, type 2 diabetes, obesity, and other diseases can converge on the brain's lipid metabolism, how significantly do these metabolic shocks actually accelerate the cellular path towards Alzheimer's disease? And if they do, and what are lipids? How do they work?
Look, I think in general, and even when it comes to people who do medical health, there's kind of those who do the work with the brain and those who don't work with the brain. And I've heard some very influential persons who do great work with peripheral diseases, the metabolic diseases you spoke about, and they've gone, well, how does the brain fit in this? Oh, well, I'm not sure, but the brain's hard. But also the other people who just work on brain diseases like myself, we tend to treat the brain very insularly as we think about it. So there is definitely a kind of a disconnect there. But in reality, the brain it represents about 2% of the mass of a human. Our brain is it's related to our height actually, but in general, human brains over our sort of variation in height would range from about 1.2 to 1.5 kilos. But it uses 20% of the oxygen, so 10 times. It uses 20% of the energy in the form of glucose, and it's demanding for those resources. So everything else is right as long as I'm looked after, and that can create a few problems elsewhere in the body actually too. But the main point is, just like adipose tissue or fat tissue, I mean, the brain is a very, very fatty organ. I'll come back to your lipids question, and a very vascular organ. And really it's just, although unusual, it's just like any other organ in the body in that it needs a blood supply. And so for things like, you mentioned some type 2 diabetes, one of their major effects is on the lining of blood vessels. And we see a lot of conditions where people, can have amputations because of damage to their vasculature with a disease like that. And the similar things happening in the brain. So that's kind of one aspect of it. The other thing about lipids, well, lipids are one of three sort of large classes of what we call macromolecules coming through the diet. We have our carbohydrates, we have our proteins, and then we have these other molecules called lipids. Lipids and you can usually use the name fats and lipids interchangeably, but there is probably about 30,000 different lipids if we get down to species or what we call class level with lipids, and all sorts of variations. But lipids are for our membranes that surround our cells. They are made up of lipid bilayers. And those bilayers are combinations of different lipids and include one that we all know a little bit about called cholesterol. Those lipids not only give our cells or the membranes that surround our cells their structure, but they also give it their fluidity and integrate with proteins which sit in the lipid bilayer and operate as receptors with all sorts of messages that are going past that particular cell. And then lipids, in the sense that most of us are familiar with them, are also a store of energy. So our fat tissue, which for us can find its way, particularly as we age a little bit, onto our gut, for example, in the case of men, that's a real storage of energy. And so there's a lot of thinking around. You might hear things like the thrift hypothesis and all this type of stuff, and why we have, with Western diets, we've got obesity issues and that type of stuff. But I won't go into that here. So those are what lipids are. One of the macromolecules that make up any animal, but human body, but a lot of lipids in the brain. In fact, after fats or fatty tissue, the brain has the most lipids of any organ in the body.
It's fascinating. So do we need to treat those lipids well?
So we have asked, or I, either ignorantly or expertly, I'm not sure yet, have asked if we eat a lot of, let's say, rubbish, to be a little bit hyperbolic, bad Western diets and that, and we take in a lot of bad fats, trans fats, etc. Are those going to be automatically transferred across to the brain, and therefore the brain starts being made up of, or as it turns over, not that it turns over a lot, but if it's doing any replacement, then the bad fats are arriving. and affecting brain performance. I'm not sure that happens. The brain seems to have, of all organs, the best ability to starve off bad lipids. Now, the organ that doesn't do a good job of it is actually the liver. And the fact that we're talking about alcohol today, but also the metabolic diseases, is that metabolic or fatty liver disease as a result of metabolic diseases like type 2 diabetes has only recently replaced alcohol as the main form of liver disease. Both of them, both alcohol and fatty liver due to metabolic disease, result in what they call steatosis, which is steatitis. Steatosis is another name for fat-induced inflammation in the liver, which in both potentially can give way to then fibrosis and cirrhosis, an end-stage liver disease. So the liver is very much affected by Western diet. So we have recently done an experiment where we were trying to work out exactly what you're talking about. If you give an animal, in the case of mice, bad lipids, what happens to their brain versus their liver? And the brain was relatively, although this was a short-term experiment, relatively good at absorbing bad diets. The liver, not so much.
Wow.
Now, the problem for the brain is that the liver is the major sort of cleansing, synthesis factory for the whole of the body. And if the liver starts not working well, then the brain can suffer. For example, one thing that we see in the brain is that if the liver isn't able to remove ammonia out of the system, convert it to urea and get it out via the bile, then you get a buildup of ammonia, and that gets into the brain and actually causes an issue called hepatic encephalopathy. Alcohol affects every organ in the body. It affects the liver, but then it also has indirect effects then on the brain. But at the moment, diet and the brain seems to be pretty good at dealing with bad diets. But unfortunately, those bad diets get it indirectly via the liver, and also the damage that's done to its very important blood supply.
So the brain-body connection is really important in that our brain is a part of an ecosystem.
Yep.
Is the stomach the second brain in the body? This is what I keep reading, seeing, being told by people that work in nutrition and wellness, what you're eating and putting into your body will affect the brain. Is that true?
There's definitely some truth in that. There's a lot of nerves and nerve connections that are associated with our viscera, and yes, those connections are sort of sampling what's happening in the gut, but they're actually sampling it on behalf of the brain. And those substances can come back to the brain one of two ways. They can come back via the bloodstream, and there's areas in the brain, you may have heard that the brain has got this protective layer associated with blood vessels called the blood-brain barrier, and that's true, but there are also areas in the base of the brain where that blood-brain barrier is quite thin, and it allows it to sample what's happening in the bloodstream, including what nutrients we have. But then the other thing is, and we've started to understand this a little bit more, is that something called the vagus nerve, which runs from the brainstem down into the gut, but also the liver, also the pancreas, not only is sending messages, well, basically it's sending bidirectional messages. So the brain is actually getting information via the nerves in the gut and the pancreas, and also sending information the other way, almost akin to the fact that it'll send information to a muscle to get someone to move. So this has come, you'll hear the idea of this brain, liver, gut, and occasionally microbiome kind of axis. There's a lot of people will be talking about this idea that the microbiome, or these organisms, flora and fauna that sit within our gut and help with digestion and nutrients, by manipulating them, you can manipulate substances moving across the gut, and those substances get into the blood, or receptors associated with the nerves, and then can actually manipulate what's happening in the brain.
It's absolutely fascinating. It calls for more connection with health and patient care, because I would imagine that, you know, at the moment we go to see different doctors for different things. You know, I've got my mother recently with chronic pulmonary disease, but also now having headaches. So she's seeing one disease specialist and then off to the neurosurgeon for the brain part. And it's treated very separately. Yeah. Is that something that you'll see change, do we think, in future?
Look, medicine has, with all the information, it just becomes more and more and more complex. And if you asked, you know, any specialist, they say it's just not possible to be across all of these things. I think a pediatrician, emergency department physician, and in most, a great example, a geriatrician, are very good at looking at multiple systems at the same time, and particularly in the elderly, where a lot of systems are breaking down, and it becomes an enormous balancing act to try to deal with that. I mean, one other thing, I just coming back to the earlier question is, this may be useful or not, but I do tell my students that the brain is a bit like the bridge on a ship, and the gut is kind of the engine room. That's where at least the tank, the fuel tanks, and the engine, and so the bridge is constantly telling, hey, more effort, please, less effort. But it's definitely, you know, sort of running the show, and it's constantly got these lights coming up and saying, oh, let's glucose is down, or heart rate is up, and all this type of stuff. And again, sometimes those feedback that we might go there in terms of will indicate to the person or prepare the body for the fight or flight. And then some of the conditions that we're talking about with mental illness, we've kind of, the brain is getting the wrong sort of signals and is constantly thinking it's in a fight. It's in a fight or flight zone. So, you know, it might be useful for people to think about that, like the bridge is up there with the brain, and then these other organs are actually the engine room, but they need to communicate, and that communication is bidirectional.
So the brain's constantly grappling with multiple things by the sounds of things, and then translating it for the body, or vice versa. Yeah,
it's absolutely it is, and we just keep finding new ways of working out. Oh, I didn't know that. You know, this particular hormone that is produced in the gut, the GLPs, is something I'm thinking about because these drugs like Ozempic are so popular at the moment. That's going up to the brain. It's produced in the gut, and it's going in one direction. And of course, we know that there's a lot of things that are stimulated, at least their production, and then produced in the pituitary or the adrenal glands that are going sort of in the other direction to give you the butterflies in the stomach, or high blood heart rate, but sometimes palpitations in those kind of fight or flight situations.
Yeah. And in terms of grappling with many things and situations, Warren, you've lived through high stakes stress and multiple experiences and environments. How do you personally grapple with your mental health, and what have been the impacts with family or community and or career, do you think?
In family situations, it's because you become this destructive human being. You do have family breakdowns, people not talking to each other. You become self-destructive, and you're sort of focusing on yourself. And then that's one of the things I've realized over a period of time is actually I'm like a car who's just ran into a crowd, because they're being affected by me, by my behavior and what I'm doing. And so, it's taken me, 12, 14 years to realize this, that like I'm this car that's just ran through this crowd, and his bodies are on the side of the road and stuff. And that's what you tend to do with friendships, and especially with family, because family, they love you and they care for you, and all of a sudden you're this crazy guy who's doing, you know, insane things and that, and that really affects them, and so you have sort of a couple of responses to that. They just want to get away from it. You know, you're a selfish man. And also that, you know, they get hurt by it as well. And so it also happens with friendships and business. A couple of years ago, I almost, you know, post the referendum, I almost end up bankrupt and living on the street, and a breakdown with my marriage and everything. So I had to get back through that. I was very lucky in the sense that I was, you know, my wife and I are still going through this stuff, but we sort of hung in there. But you know, it was just, you know, you become non-functional in so many ways. You know, I used to sit at home there sometimes, and the motivation to do anything, it was just gone. And here you go, here a person who used to work 24/7, you know, jump on plane. I used to do 5 flights a week, that would be in different cities, do different things and stuff like that. And all of a sudden I couldn't even get off the lounge.
The highs and lows.
Yeah.
Of the lifestyle.
For over nearly a 2-year period, I just sat on the lounge, and just I couldn't even get off it. It was just incredible.
Do you think there needs to be more education and awareness and information about the signs of mental health, helping and working or being around others who are suffering from mental health conditions? How do you think that might help?
Especially from a blokey bloke, in a sense, because we work with people who work with us and who went through problems and that, you know, and we just sort of just pushed it away and said, you know, just wake up to yourself. And that now I look back at it and I think, oh my God, you know, I should have, what I'm crying out for, I should have done for that person in the past. Yeah. And so I think, and it's not, you know, it took me, as I said, a long time just to confront it and realize I do have a problem. In fact, I'm going to swear now, if it's all right. I remember the first time I walked into the psychologist and that, and he said hello, and I said, hello, I'm Warren Mundine and I'm a cunt, because of the destructive pattern I had around myself with people.
And what was the response?
He said, well, he said, at least we know what you are now, so. and then we went from there. Yeah. It is it's not something you just got to you work your way through. And one of the things I've learned about myself, it's interesting you're talking about the body and that, and how I've learned how my body talks to each other and parts and stuff like that. Okay. And how so? It's just through exercising. Exercising is a great thing for a mental illness, you know. For me, I get out and I'll get up in the morning, I'll go for a walk or a run and do some Pilates or strengthening and stretching and stuff like that, and that really gets the blood pumping and gets you and you're able to resolve issues that's going through your head and stuff, and talk through things and that. That is so important. The other thing is it has changed me for some for good, some for not so good. I reach out to people, and this is one of the things that, and I'll get in trouble for saying this, my wife couldn't handle, was that I decided that I'm going to talk about mental health. Yeah. And because she had that shame factor, I'm married to this crazy guy. And so, but we're working through that as well, because I think one of the things I learned is if you don't talk about it, then you can't identify the problem, then you can't fix it. Yeah. And that's the important part. And it's funny how people, I once said to someone, I lost taste, and they said, what, you can't taste food or anything? And I said, no. It was like, I like to go to the football. I just lost the taste for it. I like to watch sport on TV, or I'd like to go to the concert or something. I just lost all that. That just had no taste to me, no motivation for me to do any of that again. So in dealing with family members and stuff, I just lost that taste, because I was one thing I always talked about, in politics and business, they could just destroy my business, destroy my politics and all that type of stuff, but I still got my family.
Yes. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I was destroying that thing that was holding me there as well.
And it's something you've talked about that brought you back from the brink, the impact on others.
Oh, yeah.
You said that stopped you. Do you
the impact of one of the things, like when you suicide, I tried a couple of times to do it, and then there's something in my head. I remember I had a couple of friends of mine actually, and also I deal with a lot of veterans now. I have conversation with veterans, and there's something like 75 veterans commit suicide every year because of they come back from a war zone and try and get back into society, but. One thing I learned from those experiences is like I said, I was like this motor car that ran through the crowd and caused all this damage. You realise that when people do commit suicide, they leave a broken group of people behind. People sitting there going, "Why didn't we recognise this earlier? We could have helped this person?" And there's this very blame thing that happens in it, and so that was something that pulled me back from the edge. I thought, because I thought about my kids, I thought about my couple of grandkids at the time, and the wife and everyone, friends, and I thought, I'm just going to leave a train wreck behind, and that sort of pulled me back from that blink.
Yeah.
And I thought it was very selfish of me then. I'm going to, I just don't want to wake up in the morning and stuff. So I started to, to fix myself was how I projected myself out to other people.
And by talking, you've created awareness and people thinking about these issues. Have people come forward and had conversations with you about their own mental health or these issues? Yeah,
well, that's how I got involved with the veterans, the returnees from Afghanistan and Iraq and stuff like that. One day this bloke rang me up and he said, "Look, we're going through, there's a group of us who are going through all these problems and that, and we heard you talk about it. We would like you to come and sit with us." So I'd go and sit with a group of about 10 or 12 people, and we just talk through this stuff. And then I met, and it also made me think about myself as well, because I thought I, had went through problems, and some of these people are just, their lives are totally destroyed because they went over there, thought they were doing something good, and they were putting in a situation. One of the things I think about is that all your life you're brought up to not hurt someone and not kill someone or injure someone, and then all of a sudden you got to kill someone. and then what I've worked out from that is, and this is one thing I want to work on a bit more, is we don't really look after people who come back from these places.
No, unfortunately not.
No, we sort of just drop them in and say, good luck.
Yeah.
And of
Get
course,
back to life.
this, whatever people think about the Ben Roberts-Smith thing, is that's really triggered that community because, they're struggling, and some of them haven't been able to have a job for 15 years.
Yes.
High
rates of homelessness.
Homelessness and all this type of stuff, and it's just, and so. In fact, I'm going to be there on Saturday for Anzac Day. They've asked me to come with them, so we're going to do that. And so that's helped me as well, because then it helps me reflect back on myself and my own behaviour and things, and also eating. You talk about food and how food is an important. I would just tell people to get on with the job and take some pill or something like that. But I'm learning about my dietary stuff and how that affects me and things, and doing and how I said to the doctor, I said, "Gee, where were you 40 years ago?" And he said he wasn't born. So I said, "Oh, you're a smart ass, weren't you?"
But it's all those things, as you say, you know, looking after your whole body and your whole self, and understanding what works for you and getting back to your true self, and having a community around you to talk. And I think that's a big thing where people sometimes can't reach out or understand how to get the help. And you're now getting help through counselling.
Yeah, counselling and you know, keeping the mental health system going. And I think you know, seeing a psychologist and a psychiatrist, and but also I get a lot out of talking to these veterans and learning stuff from that, and you know. But that's an extreme thing, you know, veterans. But also looking about how in our society we don't handle mental health and that really well. We sort of, it's almost like we go back to the Bedlam days and just lock them away. Just want, you know, just and even though we don't do that, but we do. But we virtually do by how people keep away from you. And that's one thing I found when I almost ended up homeless, was that people just went, "Oh, we don't want to be seen with this bloke," type thing. So I've learned a lot about people just from this experience, and I've learned a lot about myself and my health and how I function and stuff.
And understanding, as you say, the struggle and how we deal with things. And Greg, that's something that you may have had experience with in terms of brains being donated, and you've called it a gift as such, or a legacy gift that people leave behind. Has there been a specific moment in the lab for yourself or your colleagues where the data on the slide or the research on the slide suddenly became a person with struggle, that you felt the full human weight of the struggle or their story or experience that they went through, per se, before the brain reached the lab?
I was. It's a really interesting question. One thing, and always get out of jail cards for interesting questions. We tend to think of people not so much as the individual, but we're trying to look at people with alcohol use disorder as a group versus controls, or people who are normal as a group. But look, sometimes you read the notes and you just think, you know, you poor thing, having gone through that. You become aware that where before you might have gone, and you mentioned this early in the podcast, oh yes, you brought that all on yourself. You become aware of just how everyone's life, what, you know, essentially walk a mile in someone else's shoes and whatever. But it occurred to me when I was just talking, when I was here listening to Warren, you know, that the brain is, we're talking about the similarities with the rest of the body, but the rest of the body suffers from physical or chemical trauma. The brain's the only organ that actually suffers from psychological trauma.
Okay.
And when we were talking about the veterans, we also, you know, our frontline people, our police, you know, there's a lot of PTSD associated, you know, what they're seeing on a day-to-day basis, car crashes, etc. That is having the same sort of effect as the physical or chemical injury on other parts of the body, and we don't sort of recognize it. So when someone breaks a leg or whatever, then it's quite clear to us, well, that person's going to need to be in a cast for 6 weeks, and then maybe another 6 weeks of physiotherapy after that, and get moving again, and then they'll have a degree of muscle wastage in that one leg, but they'll build it up again.
Yeah, somewhat temporary. Yeah.
But we don't know much about the brain. In fact, what we do know is if we have a major problem with the brain, there is no coming back, you know, and this is why with people who have strokes are often left with a permanent disability, whether it's the way they speak or the mobility of the arm or sensation or something like that. Some people do a little bit better. When it comes to these mental health conditions, how quickly someone can recover, we don't know a lot about. But I can imagine that it's taken quite a while for the brain to develop those behaviours and reinforce them with its kind of machinery in it. And I do feel it's a little bit like backing up the train a sort of a long way. And so what I would say to anyone is that, some of the drugs that we have are very good, but many people complain that it tends to dull, and so it sort of dulls the pain, for want of a better term. But be kind to yourself. Realise that there's damage. There's things that have happened in your brain that have damaged it, and you've got to give yourself time to get over that damage. And time is a great healer. Yeah. But also recognising, and I'm sure Warren could speak more about this, what were the behaviours, or what were the things that were one time the bravados and that were very good, were actually started to becoming the behaviours that were, they were bad. And often you have to, look deep inside yourself and say, look, I've got to change. Yeah. I've got to change. And I think those are the, the combinations. So both being aware, but then also being kind to yourself and saying, look, I've got to give myself the time to get over that I'm injured.
And it's not a sprint, it might be a marathon, and it's a prolonged process to keep working through, and it's something you just talked about then.
That's why I keep on referring it to as a journey, because it's not like, next week, like a broken arm, you do your plaques, you do that, get it fixed, and 6 weeks down the track, another 6 weeks down the track, you do your physio and get you, and it's there, you're finished. It's something that you continue with this journey that you're going on, and it's something that it does change you. Like I've changed as a person, which I hope is for the good in regard to recognizing and seeing that in other people, and not saying, oh, keep away from me, you're just a crazy guy or something like that. But also talking, yes, you about manhood. You are, men can be very destructive about ourselves, and as I say it, we didn't advance too far from the cave. People think we're complicated, but we're not really. It's so learning about that we do have frailties, and we do have things that affect us, and that, and there's nothing wrong with that. It is, there's no shame. That's one thing I wanted to do. I hate that word shame now. Like
it's overused.
It's abused. You shame, and that's what affected me a lot. I used to be, I'm saying things to myself, I'm going for this thing. This is embarrassing. It's shame to me. And that's why I hate the word now. It is, there's nothing to be ashamed of. It is what it is, and you've got to work through this process and open yourself up for it.
And as you're saying, in terms of the, fragile psyche or behaviours, you see in younger generations today this concept of looks maxing, where young men are trying to reshape their faces through self-inflicted
violence. Warren was ahead of the curve with this. He's a very good-looking man.
Mate, it took me a lot of wax.
So it's generational, a lot of the things that are happening in terms of men's and male mental health and the manosphere. This is another area of male toxicity, it's been termed, alpha male behaviour, and these sorts sorts goings on. Like there's subcultures and people are buying into them. Young people are subscribing to them.
We have a big worry about, this is one of the things I have a big worry about, and it's also people identifying this now, is about men. And we're getting into this really the last 20 years, I suppose, could be less or more, of they're losing themselves about who they are and
identity,
the role that they should be playing in society. And that now we're still on another journey with women, but we've done a great job in improving from when I was a kid, how women were treated to what we're doing today. We're still on that journey, but I notice with young men now, they're feeling a real lost group of people, and you can see it. What is the definition of what is a male? What is male behaviour and how you do things and that. So I see that in a lot of young people I deal with now, and that this, they don't. We've lost our role in society. You notice that with statistics in regard to university. I think a lot less men are going to university, and so now I don't know what that means. But I think there's something there that we've got to start looking at, and also the behaviour of young men and that now. It's a lot different to when I was a young bloke, and so no matter our generation, Greg and I, so we always knew something better. We're going to have a better life. Our kids are going to have a better life, and so well. Now, a lot of people don't think that way now.
Well, it's fascinating in terms of the wellness industry. We spend a lot of money on it, but people are more anxious more than ever.
Yeah.
And so, we're pouring resources or medicines or science or technology into things. But unfortunately, as humans, are we evolving and adapting well to those things? So, Greg, are you saying that at all with male students or those sorts of trends in society, linking back to anything in science or research that is telling us about those sorts of behaviours?
Yeah, probably only anecdotally.
Around
I agree.
identity.
Yeah. I agree with what's been said. I think, we're also seeing from a point of view of politics at the moment, this idea of might is right, and I think the idea of males being this sort of buff and physically strong, and then almost be able to use that physical presence to get where they want to in life. I think we can turn away from that and say you can be strong and you can be kind at the same time. Similarly for women also, I think we tend to have this kind of bravado. I mean, we know the world is tough, but you actually probably get a lot more out of the world by going and just being nice to people and actually doing someone a favour rather than feeling you're in an adversarial thing. So just quickly coming back to the university, I think in a number of courses that veterinary, I started life as a veterinarian. And when I went through, 70% of the class, well, actually that's wrong. When they first started out at veterinary school, where I did in 1970, they had almost exclusively men. By the time I got there, we were the first year that went back with more females, and now it's like 70% females. So there have been changes, and I think guys maybe more than females tend to look at professions and think, oh, that's the kind of a manly thing and that type of stuff. And I think maybe the trades, as we were talking about, guys not even wanting to go to university, that's a more manly thing to do. So I think we do put a lot of, particularly young kids, put a lot of stock in it because they're trying to understand, as Warren said, what's my place in the world? How do I live up to sometimes my dad, or how do I live up to what I see a man being? And I think with a few miles on the clock and age as Warren and I am now, you start to say, hey, we got it a little bit wrong. We would have been much better to be strong, caring, and actually gone out of our way to help people. That to me, and hopefully, well, I'm not there yet either. Hopefully I can live that type of thing, because that to me is strength, not might is right. Yeah,
vulnerability and talking about what is happening and processing and feeling those emotions. If we look to the future then, in thinking about what is going on, to the both of you, what does a genuinely resilient Australia look like in, say, 10, 20 years' time, where the head, Greg, in terms of the brain, and the heart, your lived experience, Warren, what would it look like in terms of those two things finally working together to save lives?
Wow, what a $64 question! Yeah, what would it look like? Well, I'm hoping would, and Greg just mentioned it a minute ago about you can be this man, hunter-gatherer, I suppose, and protector, but at the same time you can be this more gentler person. I think I think you mentioned about toxic masculinity and tough. I think we've got to stop putting those terms out there, and actually looking at okay, because I hope that there's no picking on my father. My father was he saw his job as working and having a job, feeding the family, having a roof over their head, and making sure we got a good education, and went on from there. It wasn't about the cuddles and one of the things I learnt from that experience was, and I'm a bloke who's always, one of the people picked up on me they said you got this thing about your father, you want, please notice me type thing.
He's the editor of your book.
I've put it. The editor of my book did that, and it was, but I went out of my way to cuddle my kids and show love and stuff like that. So hopefully we're, as I say, we're on this journey and we continue on that journey of doing that. So you can be this man, and the hunter. And that, but at the same time, you careful. And I've seen that when you go down the parks and that, you see a lot more fathers down the park with their kids and running around with them, and grandkids and stuff like that. And I think that's a positive thing we need to be focusing on and moving along that track.
And it was interesting watching the Manosphere documentary, which Louis Theroux made recently. You may have both seen it, and that Louis had drawn those threads about each of the young men or males that he was interviewing, that they had an absent father figure.
Yeah.
And so there was this propensity, if you like, to really strive and to perform and to become something high value because Dad wasn't around.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting you pick up on those relationships that are so important.
Oh, well, I think it's, and as I'm not a scientist or a biologist or anything like that, it's just from my reading and observation and everything like that. It's in our nature to have those relationships, important because, and so it's for us as a modern group is, as we're moving along on this evolution, is about how do we become these people that we are? Yes, we're still these cavemen, but at the same time we are we're looking after our families, we're enjoying our families, and it's a lot of fun to cuddle and kiss.
Great. Thoughts?
I don't know if I'll go on from that last point.
You're increasing your cuddling and your kissing
yes,
in the future.
Yes, I do need to do that.
Yeah.
Look, I'd like to think that we get back a little bit more to recognising that we are, we're one of the species on the planet. We've got a big responsibility as Australians, and an Australian, we've got a unique flora and fauna here. We've got a unique part of the world, and in general we are regarded, and a lot of people who come here, they think there's so much freedom here. People are laid back. We do not have a class system, but that's fragile, and I think we've been seeing with the news and right-wing and left-wing views and talk about having to increase our defence budget. You can see that some of the, there's tension between people in this country, and I'd suggest, that to people to get back and start saying what sort of Australia do we want? And for me, it's helping, kind of fellow Australians, but it's also, and this is the main thing I'd say about, going to university or becoming a scientist, or having a curiosity for how things work around you, and just probably, have a look and go, wow, look at that rock formation. And I often look at rock formations, particularly coming from originally from New Zealand, very young geography as opposed to a very old one in Australia. And sometimes, I'm getting a bit philosophical, but nature speaks to me. And if a lot more people actually, I think, looked at it and think, wow, one of the great things about being a human is having nature. It's having the beaches, it's having the beautiful rainforests. It's not knocking them down and putting up another set of flats. So I think I'd like to think that we've got to live with nature, and particularly in Australia, and I think that would make us a lot happier.
Yeah. I think it would totally help the head and the heart and other facets of life, and the things that we've talked about today around addiction and diet and, struggle or performance or helping us understand ourselves better. I have the fortunate ability to spend some time in the Springbrook National Park at the moment, which is where my mother lives. Yeah. And I went for a walk through rainforests the other day and was around waterfalls, and I felt rejuvenated after an hour of just doing that. That natural medicine, which our Aboriginal and descendants and our ancestors still have the luxury of living on country and being able to tap into that.
Yeah, well, and also, like I said, we're not far from the cave, and that it's in our nature. It's in our, as I said, this is my thing, and I'm not no scientist or anything like that. It's in our nature to be with nature.
Yes,
and I think they're important. That's helped me a lot as well. Going bush and seeing the sun come up in the morning at Bondi Beach or something like that. You just go, wow, just the world's in incredible place. And I've learnt this from a couple of people as well who actually through operations and injuries actually died, and then they brought them back to life after a few minutes or something like that. And they've talked about how calming it was, and that they felt like they're part of the universe. And when I thought about it, I remember a lecture 100 years ago when I was at uni, where where someone actually talked about that, the Big Bang. We are space people. We are part of that whole process. And the people who are 30,000 light years away from us, and planets and that, we're part of that whole thing. And I think when you go and you get out in the bush and you smell the roses, as they say, you appreciate how what a good place the world is. In all its madness, there are great places.
Maybe we should smell the roses more than we smell the coffee.
Or the alcohol.
Yes.
So, Greg, then, in thinking about those things, what is one simple evidence-based habit that someone can start today to protect their neurological reserve and health, brain health?
Yeah, there'll be a lot of people probably presuming that I'm going to say the idea of use it or lose it, do crosswords and that. But interestingly, there's more support for people going out and doing physical exercise. Coming back to the point we're making about getting out in nature, they're having a better effect on brain health than actual mental exercise. Not that the latter's important, but I'd probably be suggesting to people to get out, use your body. We're made to move. That's what we're evolutionarily designed to do. So make a little bit of exercise, even incidental exercise. I'll just take those set of stairs, at least starting off with one set. And that's probably the best thing you could do if there was one thing.
Yeah. You talked about the crossword puzzles and stuff. That's what we're all told. Read a book, do this and that. And yes, they're great. You do it. But from my experience, my personal experience and observation is, get out, go for a walk. Go for out in the bush, and see the. I've been travelling around lately, just taking a few days off here and there, and going to places I hadn't seen before, and just marvel at it, what a great earth we got, and talking to people and mixing with people and getting out and exercising has really, I think that's done the most benefit for me, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
I want to thank you both today for your time and your insights and honest conversation. It's been truly a pleasure to sit with you both and understand your work, and Warren, Greg, your work, and Warren, your journey. Today, we aim to bridge the gap between the personal and the national, the hidden failures inside ourselves and the visible ones in our communities. The takeaways have been clear. Addiction and dementia aren't just wellness hurdles, they can be measurable. The physical storms in our tissue do exist, or our lipids and other parts of our body. And as Warren showed us, no matter how high you climb, nobody is immune to pressure. Strength isn't about hiding the struggle. It's about owning the data in our own lives and understanding ourselves. I want to thank my guests today, Professor Greg Sutherland and Warren Mundine, for your insights, your time, and this brilliant conversation. I'm Krystal Perkins, and this is Unfiltered. Thanks for listening to this episode of Unfiltered. Click follow to get notified about future episodes streaming on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Leaving a review helps others find the podcast. And if you'd like to connect, follow me at Krystal Perkins _1.